The September morning had brought unusual visitors to Baker Street. A solicitor with the anxious bearing of a man whose professional reputation hung in the balance, and a young gentleman whose very existence had thrown one of England's oldest families into chaos. Holmes, who had been cataloguing various tobacco ashes in preparation for a monograph on the subject, set aside his work immediately upon noting the solicitor's briefcase bore the emblem of Whitfield and Associates, a firm that handled only the most distinguished estates in England. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," the solicitor began, his voice carrying the careful precision of legal training. "I am Mr. Henry Whitfield, senior partner of Whitfield and Associates. This is Mr. James Worthington, or rather, the young man who claims to be James Worthington, legitimate heir to the Worthington fortune and the Earl of Blackwood title. 3 weeks ago, this gentleman appeared at our offices with documents purporting to prove he is the missing son of the late Earl, presumed dead for 26 years. Before I continue with this most intricate case, please subscribe to Detective Sherlock if you haven't already. Your support helps us bring these mysteries to life. Like this video, hit the notification bell, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let us proceed with the extraordinary mystery of the heir who wasn't. The young man who called himself James Worthington appeared to be approximately 30 years of age, well dressed in the manner of educated gentry, with refined features and the bearing of someone accustomed to good society. Yet something in his eyes suggested a harder life than his current appearance indicated, a wariness, a calculating quality that spoke of survival rather than inherited privilege. "The situation is extraordinarily complex," Whitfield continued, settling into the chair Holmes indicated. "The late Earl of Blackwood, Edmund Worthington, died 18 months ago without legitimate issue, or so we believed. His title and vast estates passed to his younger brother, Lord William Worthington, who is currently the Earl. But if this young man's claim is genuine, William Worthington is not the rightful heir. James would inherit everything: title, estates worth over £2 million, properties spanning 3 counties, and significant political influence. "Tell me about the presumed death of the original James Worthington," Holmes said, his grey eyes sharpening with interest. Whitfield opened his briefcase and produced a thick folder of documents. James Worthington was born in 1869, the legitimate son of Edmund Worthington and his wife Catherine. When the boy was 4 years old, in 1873, the family was travelling through France. They stayed at a hotel in Paris. There was a fire, a terrible conflagration that destroyed much of the building. The Earl and Countess escaped, but their son was believed lost in the flames. His body was never recovered, but given the intensity of the fire and the child's age, it was assumed he had perished. The family was devastated. The Countess never recovered from her grief and died 10 years later. The Earl never remarried, never had other children. And now, 26 years after this fire, a man appears claiming to be the lost child, Holmes observed. What evidence does he present? The young man who claimed to be James Worthington spoke for the first time. His voice educated, but carrying traces of rougher origins. "I have memories of the fire, though fragmented. I remember being carried out by a French woman, not my mother, but someone who worked at the hotel. I was taken to an orphanage, given the name Jacques Beaumont, since no one knew my true identity. I grew up in France, eventually came to England as a young man, worked various positions. 6 months ago, an elderly French woman on her deathbed contacted me. She had been a chambermaid at that hotel in 1873. She confessed that she'd rescued a child from the fire, a wealthy English boy, and had given him to an orphanage rather than return him to his parents because she believed they'd abandoned him during the fire, fleeing to save themselves. A curious misinterpretation, I observed. What made her believe the parents had abandoned their child? She'd seen them exit the burning building without the boy, and in her panic and judgment, she assumed they'd left him behind deliberately. Only years later did she learn they'd been frantically searching for him, that they believed him dead. By then, she was afraid to come forward, afraid of being accused of kidnapping. But her guilt grew, and on her deathbed, she told me the truth, that I was the missing Worthington heir. Holmes studied the young man intently. And the evidence supporting this claim? James produced several items from his own bag. I have this, a silver christening cup with the Worthington family crest and the initials J.W. engraved on it. The chambermaid took it from my clothing when she placed me in the orphanage. I also have distinctive birthmarks that match those recorded in the family physician's notes about young James Worthington. And I have memories, vague, but consistent with the Worthington family history and the layout of their estate, Blackwood Hall. Whitfield interjected. We've verified that the christening cup is authentic. It matches records of silver commissioned by the family in 1869. The birthmarks are indeed documented in medical records. But, Mr. Holmes, we need more than physical evidence. The current Earl, William Worthington, contests this claim vigorously. He suggests this is an elaborate fraud, perhaps perpetrated by someone who learned details about the lost child and is now impersonating him to claim the inheritance. A reasonable suspicion, Holmes acknowledged. What does William Worthington offer as proof that this claim is false? He argues that any number of people could have learned about the christening cup, that birthmarks can be artificially created or are common enough to appear coincidentally similar, and that memories can be fabricated from research into the family's history. He's hired his own investigators who claim to have evidence that James is actually a French con artist named Marcel Duchamp, who has perpetrated similar inheritance frauds in the past. Holmes rose and began pacing, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin in his characteristic gesture of concentration. This presents a fascinating problem of identity verification. We have physical evidence that could support either interpretation, genuine heir or clever fraud. What we need is definitive proof, one way or the other. Mr. Whitfield, I shall take the case, but I require access to all relevant documents, permission to interview all parties, including William Worthington, and the freedom to investigate the original fire in Paris and this alleged French con artist. Over the following days, Holmes conducted one of the most exhaustive investigations I ever witnessed. He began by examining the christening cup with microscopic attention, testing the silver's composition, studying the engraving technique, even analyzing microscopic scratches and wear patterns to determine the object's age and history. The cup is genuinely old, he concluded. The silver composition matches what would have been used in 1869. The engraving style is consistent with Victorian craftsmanship. The wear patterns suggest it's been handled regularly for decades, not recently manufactured. This is an authentic Worthington family christening cup, no question. But that doesn't prove James is who he claims to be, I pointed out. The cup could have been stolen or acquired through other means. Precisely. The cup proves only that whoever possesses it had access to genuine Worthington family property. It doesn't establish identity. Holmes then examined the medical records documenting young James Worthington's birthmarks. The family physician, long deceased, had noted 3 distinctive marks: a port wine stain on the left shoulder blade, a small mole near the right temple, and an unusual crescent-shaped birthmark on the inner left ankle. When Holmes examined the claimant, all 3 marks were present and appeared genuine. I, as a physician, confirmed that the port wine stain and ankle birthmark showed characteristics consistent with congenital marks rather than artificial creation, though skilled medical tattooing could potentially replicate them. The birthmark supports his claim, I told Holmes privately, but they're not absolutely conclusive. A determined fraud with medical knowledge could potentially recreate them, especially if they had access to the original medical descriptions. Our next step was interviewing William Worthington, the current Earl, at his London residence. He was a man of perhaps 55 years, distinguished in appearance, carrying himself with the authority of inherited title and wealth. He received us with cold formality. "Mr. Holmes, I appreciate your reputation, which is why I'm cooperating with this investigation, despite my absolute conviction that this James is a fraud," William said. "My brother Edmund was devastated by his son's death. He searched for years, hired investigators, never gave up hope until late in his life. If there were any genuine possibility that James had survived, Edmund would have found him. The timing of this claim, appearing just after Edmund's death, when the inheritance is settled and secure, is highly suspicious." "You believe this is a calculated fraud targeting the family fortune?" Holmes said. "I'm certain of it. I've hired investigators who've uncovered disturbing information about this imposter. They found evidence that he's actually Marcel Duchamp, a French swindler who has attempted similar inheritance frauds in France and Belgium. There are court records, eyewitness testimonies, even photographs that appear to show the same man under different names, claiming different inheritances." "May I examine this evidence?" Holmes asked. William produced a thick dossier. Holmes spent over an hour reviewing it. Police reports from France describing Marcel Duchamp's various schemes, testimonies from victims of previous frauds, and several photographs showing a man who bore resemblance to the current claimant, though the image quality made definitive identification difficult. "This is compelling evidence of a pattern of fraud," Holmes acknowledged. "However, I note that none of these photographs are of sufficient quality to make absolutely certain identification. The descriptions of Marcel Duchamp's appearance are consistent with our claimant, but they're also fairly generic. Average height, dark hair, refined features. This could be the same man, or it could be coincidental similarity." "There's more," William said. "I've also investigated the story about the deathbed confession from the French chambermaid. According to my investigators, no such woman existed. They've searched records of the hotel staff at the time of the fire and found no chambermaid matching the description James provided. The entire story appears to be fabricated. This was a serious blow to James's credibility. Holmes immediately sent telegrams to contacts in Paris, requesting independent verification of the chambermaid's existence and the orphanage records for a child named Jacques Beaumont. The replies that arrived over the next several days were troubling. French authorities confirmed that hotel employment records from 1873 were incomplete. The fire had destroyed many documents. They could neither confirm nor deny the existence of a chambermaid matching James's description. The orphanage records did show a child named Jacques Beaumont, admitted in late 1873, approximately the right age. But the records provided no information about his origins beyond noting he was found abandoned. The evidence remains ambiguous, Holmes said, studying the telegrams. Nothing definitively proves James is genuine, but nothing definitively proves he's a fraud either. We need a different approach. Holmes's breakthrough came from an unexpected direction: a detailed study of the original fire at the Paris hotel. He obtained archived French newspaper accounts, fire department reports, and witness testimonies from 1873. What emerged was a complex picture of a chaotic event with multiple conflicting accounts. According to official reports, the fire had started in the hotel kitchen late at night and spread rapidly through the wooden structure. Guests fled in panic. The Worthington family, Earl Edmund, Countess Catherine, and young James, had rooms on the second floor. Multiple witnesses confirmed seeing the Earl and Countess escape, but accounts differed on whether they had their child with them. One witness statement caught Holmes's attention particularly. A French police officer who had helped with the evacuation reported seeing an English couple fleeing with a child, then returning into the building in desperate search, the child no longer with them. This suggested the parents had initially escaped with James, but then lost him somehow, perhaps in the chaos and smoke. This supports James's account, Holmes said. The chambermaid could have taken the child from the parents during the confusion, or the child could have wandered off in the chaos. The parents then re-entered the building searching for him, not realizing he'd been taken to safety by someone else. But there was another witness statement that complicated matters. A hotel guest who claimed to have seen a chambermaid carrying a child out a back entrance during the fire, moving quickly and secretively as if escaping with stolen property. This could be interpreted two ways, I observed. Either the chambermaid was genuinely rescuing the child, or she was kidnapping him opportunistically during the chaos. Or, Holmes added grimly, it could be a fabricated statement inserted later to support a fraud scheme. We must determine which interpretation is correct. Holmes's next step was to investigate the alleged Marcel Duchamp connection more thoroughly. He traveled to Paris, taking me with him, to examine the French police records directly and interview people who claimed to have encountered Duchamp. What we discovered was fascinating and disturbing. Marcel Duchamp was indeed a real person with a documented history of inheritance fraud schemes. However, the more we investigated, the more peculiar the evidence became. Watson, observe this carefully, Holmes said, showing me police photographs of Duchamp from various arrests. These photos span 10 years, from 1885 to 1895. Yet the man's appearance is inconsistent. In some photos, he has a prominent scar on his left cheek. In others, no scar is visible. In some, his nose appears straight. In others, it shows evidence of having been broken. These inconsistencies suggest either remarkably effective makeup and disguise, or these are actually photographs of different men all using the same name, I completed. Exactly. Marcel Duchamp may not be a single individual, but rather an identity used by multiple fraud artists, perhaps even a criminal organization. If that's the case, then proving or disproving that our James is Marcel Duchamp becomes meaningless, because there is no single Marcel Duchamp to identify. This revelation transformed our investigation. If the evidence against James was based on a phantom identity used by multiple criminals, it couldn't definitively prove he was a fraud, but neither could it prove he was genuine. We returned to London with more questions than answers. Holmes convened a meeting with all interested parties: James, William Worthington, Solicitor Whitfield, and several family members who had known the original young James. "We need to approach this from a different angle," Holmes announced. "Physical evidence and documentary records have proven inconclusive. Instead, we must examine knowledge. What does James know that only the genuine heir would know? And what does he not know that the genuine heir should know?" Holmes began questioning James extensively about his supposed memories of early childhood before the fire. What emerged was a fascinating but frustrating mixture of vague recollections and surprising specific details. James could describe the layout of Blackwood Hall accurately, including a hidden door in the nursery that connected to the servants' stairs, a detail confirmed by William but not documented in any public records or family histories. Yet he couldn't remember the names of any servants who would have worked there, couldn't recall the colour of his mother's favourite dress, and had no memory of a beloved dog that the original James had supposedly been inseparable from. "His knowledge is selective," William argued. "He knows physical details that could have been learned from observation or research, but he lacks the intimate personal memories that a real family member would possess." "Or," James countered, "I was 4 years old when separated from my family. Physical spaces make strong impressions on small children. I remember the excitement of discovering that hidden door. But servants' names, clothing colours, even pets might not be remembered clearly after 26 years, especially after a traumatic separation." Holmes pressed further, asking about obscure family traditions, specific incidents that only family members would know about, relationships between various relatives. James's responses were sometimes accurate, sometimes confused, and occasionally completely wrong. "He's studying us," one of the family members whispered to me during a break, watching our reactions, adjusting his answers based on whether we confirm or deny his statements. "It's like he's feeling his way through a maze rather than genuinely remembering." "Or," I suggested, "he's uncertain of traumatic childhood memories and seeking confirmation, which is psychologically normal for someone trying to recover fragmented recollections." The investigation seemed deadlocked until Holmes made an unexpected request. "I want to conduct a psychological experiment. Both James and William must participate. I'm going to show you a series of objects that belonged to the original young James Worthington. Toys, books, clothing items that have been preserved by the family. I'll observe your reactions carefully. Genuine emotional recognition is extremely difficult to fake." The experiment was conducted at Blackwood Hall, the family estate in Hertfordshire. The current Earl had preserved the nursery exactly as it had been when young James disappeared, keeping his possessions as a memorial. Holmes arranged the objects on tables, then brought in James and William separately to view them. I watched as Holmes observed every detail of their reactions: pupil dilation, breathing patterns, hand movements, facial expressions. When James saw a particular toy horse, his hand trembled slightly, and he touched it with unmistakable tenderness. When shown a children's book, he opened it and seemed to know instinctively where to look for something: a child's scrawled name on the inside cover. Remarkable, Holmes murmured, making notes. His reactions showed genuine emotional connection, not performed nostalgia. But then came a crucial moment. Holmes showed James a small soldier figurine, a toy that, according to family records, had been young James's absolute favorite, carried everywhere, slept with every night. James looked at it with polite interest, but no special recognition. William pounced on this immediately. He doesn't remember it. That soldier was my nephew's most treasured possession. If he were truly James, he would recognize it instantly. James looked distressed. It seems familiar, but I can't place why. Perhaps I've forgotten, or perhaps the memories are too deeply buried. Holmes said nothing, but continued his examination. Later, in private, he shared his analysis with me. Watson, that reaction was actually more convincing of authenticity than immediate recognition would have been. A fraud who had researched the family would know about the beloved toy soldier and would have feigned strong emotional response to it. James's uncertain reaction suggests he genuinely doesn't remember, which is psychologically consistent with trauma. Sometimes the most important things are what we forget because they're too painful to remember. But you're not certain, I said. No, Holmes admitted. I'm not certain. This case presents an unusual problem. Both the hypothesis of genuine heir and the hypothesis of clever fraud can explain most of the evidence. What we need is something that decisively favors one interpretation over the other. Holmes's definitive breakthrough came from the most unlikely source, a careful analysis of the claimant's physical characteristics compared to known genetic traits of the Worthington family. Holmes had been consulting with Francis Galton, the pioneering researcher into heredity and fingerprints, about methods of establishing familial relationships through physical markers. Mr. Galton has developed preliminary methods for analyzing inherited characteristics, Holmes explained. While the science is still developing, certain traits are known to pass reliably from parent to child. The Worthington family has several distinctive features that appear across generations. Holmes catalogued these features through examining family portraits, photographs, and living relatives. The Worthington family showed a distinctive ear shape. The antihelix had an unusual folding pattern that appeared in multiple family members across 3 generations. They also showed a particular arrangement of fingerprint patterns and a rare iris coloration, a distinctive flecking of amber within brown eyes. When Holmes examined James minutely, he found all 3 characteristics present. The ear shape matched the Worthington pattern exactly. His fingerprints showed the same ridge characteristics that appeared in other family members. And his eyes, on close examination under strong light, showed the distinctive amber flecking. These characteristics taken together are highly unusual, Holmes explained. The probability of a random individual showing all 3 Worthington family markers is astronomically small. This is strong evidence that James is genuinely related to the Worthington family by blood. But William remained unconvinced. Perhaps he's a bastard child from some collateral branch of the family. Perhaps his mother was a Worthington cousin, or a maid who had an affair with a Worthington relative. That would explain the physical similarities without making him the legitimate heir. A valid point, Holmes acknowledged. We need something more definitive. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source, a detailed investigation of the French orphanage records. Holmes's French contacts had continued digging and discovered something extraordinary. The orphanage had kept not just admission records, but detailed physical descriptions of children admitted, including any distinguishing marks or characteristics noted upon arrival. The record for Jacques Beaumont, admitted in late 1873, noted, "Male child, approximately 4 years, well-nourished, quality clothing. Notable marks: birthmark on left shoulder, small mark near right temple, unusual crescent mark on left ankle. Child initially spoke English with aristocratic accent, learned French over time. Possessions, silver cup with engraving. This record was made within days of the fire, Holmes said excitedly. The orphanage had no reason to fabricate it, no knowledge of the Worthington family or any inheritance that might be claimed decades later. This contemporaneous documentation of the birthmarks and the silver cup, created at the time of admission, is powerful evidence that Jacques Beaumont and James Worthington were the same person. But Holmes wasn't satisfied yet. He travelled to the orphanage itself, still operating after more than a century, and examined the original ledger where the admission had been recorded. He studied the handwriting, the ink, the paper, looking for any signs of later alteration or forgery. The entry is genuine, he concluded. The ink has aged consistently with the paper. The handwriting matches other entries from the same period, written by the same hand. Presumably, the orphanage director of that era. There's no evidence of later alteration. This entry was genuinely made in 1873, documenting a child with the exact same rare combination of birthmarks that James Worthington possessed. Holmes also investigated William Worthington's counter-evidence about Marcel Duchamp more thoroughly. What he discovered was damning to William. Several of the witness statements about Duchamp's fraud schemes showed signs of fabrication. Documents that were supposedly French court records contained errors that a genuine French legal document would never contain. Some of the photographs alleged to be Duchamp appeared to have been deliberately mislabeled. One turned out to be a stock photograph from a French criminal archive, not actually related to any case involving someone named Duchamp. William has been manufacturing evidence, Holmes told me grimly. He's so convinced the claim is fraudulent, or so desperate to protect his inheritance, that he's resorted to creating false documentation to discredit James. This doesn't prove James is genuine, but it eliminates much of the evidence that supposedly proved he was a fraud. The case was building toward a dramatic confrontation. Holmes arranged a formal meeting with all parties, including independent legal observers and a representative from the College of Arms, who adjudicated questions of peerage inheritance. "Ladies and gentlemen," Holmes began, "I have conducted one of the most thorough investigations of my career. The question before us is whether this man is genuinely James Worthington, legitimate heir to the Earl of Blackwood title and estates, or an impostor perpetrating fraud. I shall present my conclusions." Holmes methodically reviewed the evidence: the authenticated christening cup, the documented birthmarks recorded contemporaneously in orphanage records, the genetic markers showing Worthington family traits, the selective but psychologically consistent memories, the emotional reactions to family possessions. Against this evidence, he continued, we have allegations of fraud that have largely dissolved upon investigation. The Marcel Duchamp connection appears to be based on fabricated or mislabeled documentation. The claim that the chambermaid didn't exist cannot be proven. Employment records from that era are incomplete, and crucially, no one has provided any alternative explanation for how a 4-year-old child could have acquired a Worthington family christening cup, developed Worthington family genetic traits, and been documented in a French orphanage with birthmarks matching the lost heir's description. All in 1873, decades before any inheritance claim could be anticipated. Holmes paused, looking at each person in the room. The principle of Occam's razor states that when multiple explanations exist, the simplest one is usually correct. The simplest explanation for all this evidence is that James Worthington is exactly who he claims to be. The child who survived the Paris fire was taken to an orphanage by a well-meaning but mistaken chambermaid and grew up unaware of his true identity until recently. The alternative explanation, that he's an imposter who somehow acquired authentic family silver, developed genetic traits matching the Worthington family, and had fake entries inserted into French orphanage records over a century ago, is vastly more complex and implausible. The legal representative from the College of Arms spoke. "Mr. Holmes, are you stating definitively that this man is the legitimate heir?" "I am stating that the preponderance of evidence strongly supports his claim," Holmes replied. "Absolute certainty in such matters is impossible. We cannot travel back in time and verify events firsthand. But based on all available evidence, properly evaluated, I conclude that James Worthington's claim to be the missing heir is genuine and should be recognized by law." The room erupted in simultaneous expressions of vindication and protest. William Worthington stood, his face flushed with anger and something else. Fear, perhaps, of losing everything he'd thought secured. "This is outrageous. You're basing your conclusion on circumstantial evidence and genetic speculation. I demand a full legal hearing with proper judicial review." "And you shall have one," the legal representative assured him. "But Mr. Holmes's investigation and conclusions will carry considerable weight in that proceeding. The burden of proof has shifted. Mr. James must now be treated as the presumptive heir, unless definitive evidence of fraud can be produced." The legal proceedings that followed lasted 3 months. William Worthington fought desperately, hiring multiple experts and investigators to challenge Holmes's findings. But ultimately, none of his evidence could overcome the cumulative weight of the documentation Holmes had assembled. The crucial moment came when William's own expert witness, a geneticist brought in to challenge Holmes's genetic evidence, instead confirmed that the combination of traits James displayed was indeed consistent with Worthington family heredity and extremely unlikely to appear in an unrelated individual. "I was hired to prove he's not a Worthington," the geneticist admitted under oath. "But scientific integrity compels me to testify that the genetic evidence supports his claim. The probability of a random fraud possessing this exact combination of rare, inherited traits is less than 1 in a million." The court's final ruling came down decisively in James's favor. He was recognized as the legitimate son of the late Earl Edmund Worthington, rightful heir to the title and estates. William Worthington was ordered to surrender all inherited properties and assets, though he was provided a substantial allowance from the estate as a displaced heir. "Justice has been served," Holmes observed as we read the court's decision. Though I confess some sympathy for William. He had held the title for 18 months, believed it rightfully his after his brother died without known issue. To have it stripped away must be devastating. "Did you ever have doubts about James's authenticity?" I asked. "Many doubts," Holmes admitted. "Throughout the investigation, I remained open to the possibility that he was a brilliant fraud. The evidence could have pointed either direction. What ultimately convinced me was the convergence of multiple independent lines of evidence. The orphanage records made decades before any claim could be anticipated. The genetic markers, the authentic family silver, the psychological consistency of his memories and reactions. Any one piece of evidence could potentially be explained by fraud, but all of them together, particularly the contemporaneous orphanage documentation, made fraud extraordinarily implausible." Several weeks after the court decision, James Worthington, now officially the Earl of Blackwood, visited Baker Street to express his gratitude. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I owe you more than money can repay," he said. "You gave me back not just an inheritance, but an identity, a connection to family, history, belonging that I never knew existed. Growing up as an orphan in France, I had no sense of who I was or where I came from. Now I know. That knowledge is worth more than all the estates and titles combined." "What will you do now?" I asked. "Running such large estates is a tremendous responsibility." "I'll learn," James said. "I've hired excellent advisors, including Mr. Whitfield, who first brought my case to you. I'm establishing a trust fund for orphans in France, something good coming from my own orphaned years. And I'm reaching out to William, offering him a position managing some of the estates. He's family after all, and he genuinely loved my father, even if he fought against my claim. Perhaps in time we can build a relationship." "That shows admirable generosity," Holmes observed. "Many in your position would seek revenge against someone who fought so hard against their claim." "I understand his resistance," James replied. "I appeared out of nowhere, disrupting his life, claiming what he believed was rightfully his. His reaction was human, even if some of his methods were unacceptable. I'd rather build bridges than burn them." After James departed, Holmes and I sat before the fire, reflecting on the case. "You called him the heir who wasn't," I said. "But in the end, he turned out to be exactly what he claimed." "Ah, but the title refers to something deeper than legal identity," Holmes replied. "For 26 years, James Worthington wasn't an heir. He was Jacques Beaumont, French orphan, working man, someone with no inheritance and no claim to nobility. The heir he was supposed to be didn't exist during those years. He became an heir only when the truth was discovered and legally recognized. So in a sense, he spent most of his life being the heir who wasn't, living under false identity, disconnected from his true heritage." "You're being philosophical," I observed with a smile. "The case invites philosophical reflection," Holmes said. "What makes someone who they are? Is it biology, genetic inheritance, physical characteristics? Is it memory and experience? Is it legal documentation and social recognition? James is genetically a Worthington, but he was raised as Jacques Beaumont. Which identity is real? The answer, I think, is that both are real. He's a man who lived two lives, orphan and earl, and must now reconcile those identities into a coherent whole." The case also raises troubling questions about inheritance and legitimacy, I added. James had no opportunity to develop the education, training, or social connections that typically prepare someone for managing great estates and wielding aristocratic influence. He's literally an outsider inheriting an insider's role, which may ultimately benefit the estates and the families who depend on them, Holmes suggested. James has known hardship, worked for his living, experienced life outside the aristocratic bubble. He may bring perspectives and sensibilities that someone raised to inherit would never develop. Sometimes the outsider makes the better leader precisely because they understand what insiders never see. The case of the heir who wasn't entered my notes as one of Holmes's most complex identity investigations. It demonstrated his ability to work with emerging scientific methods, genetic inheritance, psychological analysis, forensic document examination, while also understanding the human elements of memory, trauma, and family relationships. The case also illustrated important investigative principles. Holmes had resisted rushing to judgment despite early evidence that could have supported either conclusion. He'd systematically gathered multiple independent sources of evidence, recognizing that any single piece could be misleading, but that convergent evidence from different domains becomes increasingly reliable. And he'd maintained intellectual humility, acknowledging uncertainty, while ultimately making the judgment that available evidence supported. Years later, I learned that James Worthington, Earl of Blackwood, became an exemplary nobleman, managing his estates responsibly, supporting charitable causes, serving in the House of Lords with distinction. His unique background as both orphan and aristocrat gave him perspectives that bridged social classes and informed progressive policies. William Worthington eventually reconciled with James and became a trusted advisor, the two men developing a genuine brotherly relationship that honored the memory of the late Earl Edmund. The estates prospered under their combined management, demonstrating that family can be built as well as inherited. The case left me with profound questions about identity and belonging. James Worthington's DNA and birthmarks proclaimed him a member of one family, while his memories and formative experiences connected him to another. He was simultaneously the lost child of aristocratic parents and the orphaned boy who grew up in French poverty. Both identities were authentic. Neither could be dismissed. Holmes's genius lay in recognizing that the mystery wasn't really about who James was. The evidence clearly pointed to biological identity. The deeper mystery was how someone could simultaneously be and not be the heir, could rightfully claim an inheritance while being utterly unprepared by experience to receive it. The heir who wasn't became the heir who was, not through any change in essential identity, but through the legal and social recognition of a truth that had always existed. And perhaps that's the final lesson, that identity is complex, multi-layered, sometimes contradictory. We are what our biology makes us, what our experiences shape us into, and what society recognizes us to be. James Worthington was all of these simultaneously: the genetic heir, the working-class orphan, and the Earl who must learn to reconcile these competing identities into a unified self.